மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.
Okay, welcome back, guys. And in this video, I want to show pretty much a full game, which will end in this nice tactical sequence. But it was a game that I played about a year ago in the Czech Republic. I was playing a relatively strong FM by the name of Jan Bartos. And it was a final round of a pretty long open event. It was a 9-round tournament. And I was pretty tired, and my opponent was blitzing out most of the moves, and I was taking a lot of time. So by the time we reached kind of the final key moments, I was in pretty severe time pressure. But we'll get to that. I do want to zoom through the opening here. We played a relatively quiet variation of the London with this early trade on d4, and both sides kind of just developed pretty normally. I didn't go crazy here and try and kill my opponent right away. More of a pretty quiet positional opening. Now, I do want to note after I play a4 on move 11, this is kind of the last, I'll say the last of my preparation, but this is one of the last ideas that I had in the position that I've seen before. The idea of a4 is actually very simple. It's just a positional idea to attempt to undermine black's pawn structure. And if I can, I would like to play a5 to perhaps open the a file and create some weaknesses in black's position. So my opponent responded pretty appropriately, played a6, with the idea that if I play a5 now, he would be happy to play b5. So going back, I decided to play queen b3. We continue, rook e8, and now I play another typical move, h3. Idea, if he ever plays knight h5, my bishop would then have a very safe retreat square on h2. Because usually in positions like this, I would never want to trade off my dark square bishop for his knights. So going forward here, he played bishop f8. And then I took a long time on this moment. I wasn't quite sure how to proceed. This is one of these middle game situations where you're fully developed and, I mean, you're castled, you have your pieces out. It's a question of what to do next. And I took a long time trying to search for ideas, and I eventually decided on this move knight g5, thinking that I could perhaps maneuver to e4 and try and put more pressure on black's position. And then the additional threat of knight g5, I was thinking that if maybe he ignores it and plays some move like rook c8, then I could play queen c2 and potentially utilize this tactic that we saw earlier. If he were to blunder here with h6, I would just have mate in 2 with bishop h7, and whatever black does, it's just mate next move, for example. This line knight take f7 would be mate. So going back, that was the basic premise with knight g5. But really, after what happened in the game, h6, knight e4, it was more positional play. I was going for slightly more pressure against the d6 pawn. He played queen c7. Then I played queen c4. My idea was that if he were to take on c4, I have this intermediate move, knight take f6, so avoiding any possible forks by him. And then after knight take f6, I can then recapture. And this would be actually winning a pawn for whites, given that I'm forking both the d and b pawns, and he can't defend both of them. So he didn't take on c4. He played queen b8, safe move. Going forward here, the position eventually transformed. I played bishop c2, going for this potential battery against the diagonal. So he took, I take, and then e5. And this is where the position really starts to transform. But I don't think e5 was a great move, because it allows me more scope along this diagonal. And especially when he plays, right after he plays e5, I start looking for ideas of bishop b3. So that's what I do very soon. First I take, and then I play bishop b3, targeting f7, knowing that if he ever takes my bishop, he'll be severely punished. For example, after queen take f7. It's actually force mate here. If king h7, I have knight g5, and then queen to h5 mates. So he did have to take a measure to defend this f7 pawn. He played rook e7. And then I simply retreat to g3, keeping the pressure. Now I'm happy with both my bishops, exerting a lot of pressure throughout the position. He played bishop take e4 here. I take. And then he played knight c5. So he's very much forcing matters, and he just wants to perhaps simplify things to relieve the pressure. And this is a moment where I have a pretty big decision to make, because he is attacking my my bishop on b3 and my rook on e4. And in this case, I have a few options. I have a very safe option of just retreating my rook, playing a move like rook to e3. But then after knight take b3, queen take b3, maybe there's some small advantage for white, but it's not really that much. So going back, the other option in this position is to play rook take e5, and this is really the key tactical move. And it's a difficult move to play because it does lead to a sacrifice, and it leads to kind of a long forcing variation. So after a long think, I did play rook take e5. And after rook take e5, queen take f7, I went for this line knowing that if I couldn't find a win, I at the very least have repetition with perpetual check. He has to play king h7 here, and then I play queen g8, forcing king g6. And visually, it looks very good for white. I mean, we just look at the position. I did sacrifice a rook, but his king's on g6. My bishops are both pretty well placed. It's a pretty open position. But it's a question of how does white make progress. And in this specific position, I made somewhat of an error. The move I played was actually not in this position. I should note that I repeated once. I played queen f7 check, king h7, and then I made my next decision. And I did this to try and gain time, and also because there's extra time added on move 40. I wanted to get to move 40 without having to think for too many more moves. But going back to this moment, I actually missed a very strong opportunity, and I do want to show this. It would have been difficult to calculate just because it's a very long variation, and I have to find a number of very strong resources and perhaps somewhat creative resources. But the strongest continuation for white is to play bishop f7, which I saw, but I was hesitant to play because after king f6, I thought my queen was a bit stuck on g8. What I missed was that I can play f4 here. Very strong move, hitting the rook, but also planning bishop h4 check. And if the rook were to move away, let's say rook e4, there's another strong move. Bishop h4 would be winning, but the strongest continuation again is bishop h5, clearing the square from f7. And this is actually a very forcing move because it's threatening mate in one, and black has to take some measure to defend here. There's not too many defensive moves black can play. Let's imagine queen to c7, then bishop h4, and then it's white having all the fun. I'm sure if I was able to perhaps calculate to this moment, I would just make the judgment that white was winning, but it was hard to get to this point. And just to demonstrate how white wins this, let's imagine black plays really one of the only legal moves, pawn g5. White just continues. The onslaught of checks can bring the rook into the game with perhaps the eventual rook f1, but bishop takes g5 should be good enough. Maybe rook f1 is even better, given that where is the king going? If king to e5, at the very least there's bishop g3, and black is getting mated and losing material, and white is just having a blast. So going back, I'll go ahead and show what happened in the game. Before this moment, so I played queen f7, and then I played a move which almost gives away the whole advantage. I played bishop to d5. Luckily for me, I was able to find some strong resources later. My opponent played rook a7. I played queen g8, king g6, and now b4. And this actually keeps the initiative, puts the question: where should black, or how should black defend? Given the knight is now attacked, I still have this pin along the diagonal, and it's very, very hard here for black to defend. My opponent played knight d7, and I repeat once more. I play queen f7, king h7, go back to g8, because I was pretty low on time. I was definitely below 5 minutes at this point. And as my time was ticking down, I finally discovered the winning resource in this position. And we actually already saw a similar idea in the previous line, but if you want to pause the video, find the cleanest way for white to win, feel free, white to move, and play the strongest move. So the strongest move is bishop to f7 check, and after king f6, an incredibly strong bishop h5. This is an idea that I had overlooked earlier, but luckily I was in time to find in this position. It's just a clearance move with a threat of queen f7, and that would be, if I'm not mistaken, that would be a mating 2 threat after king g5, queen g6 mates. Meanwhile, black can't really do much about it. If, I mean, the rook can't take because it's still pinned to the queen. The knight would like to move, so the rook can defend, but the knight actually has no squares to move to. It's amazing how black's pieces are taking away almost all of the squares the knight can move to. And of course, c5 off limits due to the pawn. So, my opponent played knight c5 anyway here. And then it was just a matter of scooping up material. Even though I'm down a rook here, black has 1, 2, and then eventually the bishop will also be hanging. So there's more than enough material that I can win. Bishop take e5. I should mention, okay, if queen take e5, I would just win the bishop and then take the knights and be up material and have some mating attack. My opponent took with the king, which was a somewhat amusing line. I just simply take the knight, and here I'm not only up 2 pawns, but black's most active piece is a king just smack in the center of the board. And after b takes c5, just a matter of delivering the checks, rook e1, king d6, rook e6 check, and here my opponent resigned, except the final move says king d5, though he didn't play king d5. It shows king d5 because we put the kings in the center on light squares because we were playing on the DGT board, and that's what you do if white wins. So if king d5 were played, there is a mate in 3 here. I can play bishop to f3, king c4, rook e3 check, and then the only legal move from black, rook f7, and then queen take f7 mates. So pretty cool way to end the game, and especially end the tournament in my case. But I thought this game kind of goes to show that sometimes these tactical lines aren't entirely clear, and sometimes you have to rely on intuition, and you also have to manage your time earlier in the game, so you have enough time when the tactical moments come. You have enough time to calculate. Luckily, I had just enough time to find the winning resources in this case. So hope you guys enjoyed that, and I will see you for another lesson.
மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.